Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bear Down Ballers here on the Field of 68. I'm Ryan Wall, joined as always by Jordan Pollock. And Jordan, for the first time in the Tommy Lloyd era at Arizona basketball, he suffered his first time that he suffered two straight losses in his head coaching career. Arizona dropped to 2-2 on the season, 69 to 55 to Duke on Friday night, and they fall in the rankings to 24. So they're right on the edge of that top 25. But yeah, how are you doing today before we get into the game?
Doing good, man. I'm doing good. This is a great week and to just kind of take a step back and just kind of think about everything we're thankful about. And it's a great week for college basketball. It's one of my favorite weeks with all the early season tournaments, and we get some really fun matchups in different places and yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, it's one of the best sports weeks of the year, I think, for me. I think this is up there. Obviously, it's not conference tournament week in college basketball or March Madness. That first week is a great one. It's not like that, but it's right below that for me. The every day the slate just seems like it continues to get better. And Wednesday night the battle for Atlantis begins, and Arizona takes on Davidson. We'll get into that later on, but I want to start it off and talk about this loss that Arizona had to Duke. This to me was just one of the most disappointing losses, and maybe the most disappointing loss of the Tommy Lloyd era during his 4 years at Arizona. The expectations coming into this year were very high for this team, and to lose back-to-back games, and there's no shame in losing to a Duke, but they just didn't put out a good enough effort. The effort level throughout the whole game was just not on par to Duke. They were playing sloppy basketball, and you're not going to beat a historic program and one of the greatest prospects we've ever seen in Cooper Flag when you shoot 39% from the field, 26% from deep. It's just not going to cut it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just the context around this game, I think makes it even tougher to digest. Last year it was Arizona. They had guys that were in different roles, but they brought in a bunch of transfers. They brought in Caleb Love, who went into Duke, and Duke, they had a great center, but outside of that, they just had a bunch of freshmen and Jeremy Roach. And they just outplayed Duke in the Cameron Dome, and there was really no way around it. And this year it was going into the game, like both teams kind of looked battered up, but we were expecting a lot better game, I think, from especially from Arizona's stars, and they just didn't live up to it. And a lot of that is just Caleb Love has had a really tough time at the start of this year trying to find his groove and his shooting level and kind of how he fits into this team and yeah, it's just the context, and they just got outplayed. I don't really know how else to really put it. And I think the playing style and just how the game went, I think it was even hard to see if coaching was that really much of a big involvement with just how bad I thought Arizona played. And
Mhm.
it sucks because it's a detriment of how Rock and McHale was. I thought the fans did a great job from start to I would say start to finish, but that second half was just so inconsistent and so bad and so not what we've seen of Tommy Lloyd's teams. So it's hard to determine that and I think that was the difference in this game was the second half. They couldn't get stops when they needed to and they couldn't get buckets when they absolutely needed to. I know we were talking before the show started and it at times this game didn't feel like a blowout, but it never felt like they were one or two possessions away. It felt like they were two to three to four possessions away every single time. It's like, cool, we just got to make one shot and then get a stop and then make another shot and they just couldn't do that.
Yeah, it seems like after the first couple minutes of this game, Arizona and Duke were trading back buckets at the beginning, and then
Hmm.
when it got to me mid first half and later on, it kind of got out of reach. And I actually think in the first few minutes, Arizona did a pretty good job with Cooper Flag. I really do. I think they were
Hmm.
being physical, like I said, with him, using some smaller guys with Lewis and Awaka, and I really liked how they were defending him. But at a certain point, the talent of Cooper Flag is just gonna override, and I think that's what happened. He finished with 24 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, 2 3-pointers, 10 for 22 from the field. He was just excellent in the game. He was the difference. And Duke's defense was unbelievable in this contest, too. To hold Arizona to 55 points at home in McAllen, like, that's really just a different level. And getting back to what you said about coaching, and yes, I do think they need to do a better job early in the game running plays for Caleb Love, getting him involved because he seems too passive and too kind of content standing on the corner, and that's not going to equal success for Arizona. But at the end of the day, Tommy Lloyd isn't the one shooting the shots, isn't the one shooting under 30% from the field, and isn't the one going 3 for 13 like Caleb Love. And it's really just concerning because I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if it's like I said, is it the three guards in this lineup aren't working and they're having a hard time fitting into their roles, or did Caleb Love just maybe peak last year and now he's regressing? I don't really know what to make of it. What did you think of
Yeah,
Love's performance?
yeah, and that's a tough thing, and I think that some of what Tommy said in the press game is they're just going to need to take a step back and kind of look at everything, and I don't think it's necessarily one thing. Like I think maybe some of the minutes between the three guards, I think like you said, I think that could be an issue. I think offensively where they're kind of putting the ball a lot, I think could be a thing. Like they have the returning Horizon Player of the Year in Trey Townsend, and him getting 4 shots in that game. I don't love that for this team, especially
Horrible.
with Caleb Love's just major inefficiency this year. I did think a bright spot that I thought was Carter Bryant. I thought some of his minutes, I thought he looked very good. And going 2 of 4 from three, I thought was really big. The fast break points, I thought that was a big thing. They had a decent amount of opportunities and they just couldn't finish some of those shots, and that's uncharacteristic of Arizona. So I'm curious to see if that's just a one game thing, and that's at least 10 points right there on the court that they left out there. Um
Yeah,
and so I think it's a multitude of things.
and I really agree with Carter Bryant. I was really impressed with him too. It just seemed like when he comes in, he brings energy, effort. He's always trying to make something happen, and that's what I like to see. But the glaring issue on this team is they got out rebounded 43 to 30 by 13 rebounds. They don't have a consistent rebounder like they did with Balo last year and Tabellis before that. And I really think I wasn't that high on Crevis going into the year or Visar, and I wasn't high on them since they've been at Arizona pretty much. And I just think that that move going from Balo to Krivas and Visar, whoever's in there, I really think is the downfall of this team. They really have no production from the front court this year. Zero. The front court was what dominated this team the last couple years. Like I mentioned, with Balo, with Tabellis, they were the backbone of this team. And now they're lucky. Krivas got 5 points and 5 assists, 4 rebounds. That's just not good enough. And he just seems like he's getting pushed around there. He doesn't seem like he's strong enough down low. And yeah, if you don't have consistent rebounding, and also the problem, Jaden Bradley was unbelievable in this game with 18 points, 5 steals, but 3 assists. He's not a big time passer. And this is a thing I said about Jaden Bradley. He's a capable passer, but Jaden Bradley isn't there to be a primary facilitator. His primary role is to get buckets on this team. And so it's like you can't have Jaden Bradley, Love, and Lewis all on the floor to do the exact same thing. There's nobody on the floor like Kylan Boswell last year. As much as he got criticized, when he was on the floor, he was trying to get everyone else involved, not worry about himself. So it's really hard when you have those two glaring issues. When you don't have an elite facilitator and you don't have elite production from the front court.
Yeah, where do you think they could get that? Because I think on the way this roster is constructed, I think the only person that even somewhat points to that is possibly Conrad Martinez, and he's just not had very much. I don't think he's played even at all in the last 2 minutes outside of garbage minutes against Wisconsin.
Yeah, I really don't think they have that necessary guy on the roster. A guy that I want to see more in that role, actually, because I've been impressed, is KJ Lewis. I think he's been impressive
Mm,
when he's handled the ball in limited minutes. I want to see more of him handle the ball. And but yeah, I don't think this team has that guy, and maybe that's why they're playing a bunch of guards so everyone can touch the bar some. But it really is just last year they had so much structure, and maybe that was their downfall with a Boswell whose offensive production, scoring production wasn't elite, and Balo wasn't too consistent down the stretch. Maybe that was the downfall, but that's also people forget that's what got them to win Pac-12 championships and win in the regular season and be consistent. What do you think? What do you think
yeah,
they could improve between those two spots this year?
I think with the era we live in now, with the stretch that UConn has been on, I think it's really hard to kind of gauge because UConn is just at the start of 2022, they were just like amazing in like almost every sense. And so I think, especially like you said, with the structure that Arizona's had over the last few years, for them to break through, I think it is going to take some changing. And so I I think I do still have some hope that this team can somewhat figure it out. And like Tommy said, it's going to take a few steps back to look at it from a whole 180 view of like, okay, like what's the best way that this team is going to win? Because the formula is going to be very different than it's been the last few years. And I think I agree with what you said. I think KJ Lewis, I think, is a guy that I like him in the facilitator role-esque, especially the fact that he can kind of do everything. And if there's a stretch where he's not playing well, you're okay putting him out on the wing and catching and making a hard shot, faking a dribble, or just making even shot. I've been really surprised with how well he shot the three ball this year. So I think KJ is one of those guys I think you can kind of tinker around with, and I don't feel super bad about kind of running some of the offense through him, especially with just how consistent he's been in this inconsistent team.
Yeah, Jordan, KJ Lewis was the second best player on the floor for Arizona this game. 12 points, 6 rebounds, 4 for 10 from the field. He was really good, and something we mentioned, maybe an increased role for him as a facilitator, but I think maybe he should maybe start to shoot a little bit more on this team. And I think that's like I got into a little bit, the balance of shots I really think is it's kind of weird on this team because everyone's trying to fit in. It's a whole new group, and it's a whole new group in the aspect of Bradley, Love, and Lewis played some last year together, but they didn't play together 30 plus minutes a night. They weren't a full-time unit.
Definitely.
And you got Townsend who's playing. Yes, he had big success against Kentucky last year in the tournament, but now when you're playing these big time opponents every night almost, it's a different level. And yeah, I really think that if Krivas, Visar, Awoka, if one of those players don't really emerge and start to be consistent and play at a consistent level on a nightly basis, I just don't think this team is gonna be a top 25 team throughout the season this year.
Yeah, I agree. Their ceiling isn't high without those guys playing well. And one thing is I don't want to undervalue Duke because Cooper Flag and Con Knipple, the Wisconsin boy, They played so well. They played so well. I thought the defensive game plan probably could have been a little better. I would have just made anybody beat you besides those two guys, and it felt like at times those two guys were the only thing doing anything. I thought in the first half, we talked about it before we started, they did a pretty okay job defensively against Cooper Flag, and just his shot making ability is insane. And down the stretch, he kind of showed, I think, how he's gonna be possibly a number
Hmm.
one overall pick in the NBA draft. And especially later in the game, they got into defensive scenarios where they're able to get the ball out of his hands, and the defensive rotations at times. Whenever it ended up with Knipple getting the ball last, I said, "Uh-oh." And then every single possession that it wasn't Cooper Flag or Con Knipple taking a shot, I said, "Yes, that's a win." Like how I felt is probably how people feel watching the Bucks whenever Giannis takes a shot
Hmm.
outside of the paint. That's how I felt against this team,
I
and
agree.
and I
Yeah.
and I don't and maybe that's probably a better recipe for Duke, but I thought they should have made the role players take more shots and try to beat them. And and the role players didn't play bad. I'll give them that. They didn't play bad. Um
Yeah, Jordan, the
through
difference is between Arizona and Duke there is I think that Duke has their system. They play through Cooper Flag. They have two good guards in Caleb Foster and Proctor who
Yep.
steer the ship. Then they have Kneppel, like you said, on the corner on the perimeter. That's a knockdown shooter, made three. Then they got Malak, who, if I'm saying that right or not, he's a really talented freshman big man.
Yep.
And it's like all of those
Yeah, he played
guys,
well.
yes, none of those three players I just said went off. They didn't have double digits. They still had 8 points apiece.
Hmm.
They still affected the game in different ways. Foster and Proctor combined, like they still, they combined for 8 rebounds. For two guards is really impressive, and I really think that Arizona and Tommy they need to find that structure. So they need to. That's the problem. I don't think Tommy has declared Bradley as the number one facilitator and said it's going through you every time and we're going to look for Love. Like that's how it should be. Every possession, Love should be the number one option. They should play through Love on the side and try to get him more scoring options. Instead, it seems like Arizona's playing like they're just out there playing on a backyard court and they're just not really running much offense.
Yep. I I would say one thing I hope this team can figure out what their strengths are and play to their offensive strengths, and they can look back at this game later in the year and say, I'm happy we went through that because we understood what we were doing at that time wasn't working and we made the right pivots. I think this game's a learning success. I think, and it sucks. Like Arizona fans are gonna hate it. This is the second back-to-back or the back-to-back first back-to-back loss in the Tommy Lloyd era. This sucks, but it's also to Duke. So I hope fans can still, and I don't think there's been a ton of disgruntled fans against Tommy or Arizona, especially with just how loaded Tommy's made the schedule. So I'm happy about that, and I'm excited to see how this team can slowly look backwards and figure out the best way that this team's going to move forward.
Yeah, I agree that each loss can be good for learning and for growing and improving, but it's only that if you make it that. If
Yep.
you take the loss and you accept it and you grow from what you did wrong. And I really hope Arizona does because to me, although they're 4 games in, this seems like a turning point coming in the season when they're at the battle for Atlantis.
Hmm.
Because you play 3 games in 3 days, and even if they don't advance in the tournament too far, they're still the losers bracket side of things. So they're still going to play
Yep.
multiple games. They started off with Davidson Wednesday night at 7:30 on the Eastern time. But all in all, I was expecting Arizona to win this game. Would I have liked it to be closer? Yes. But Arizona just they seem like since the tournament last year, they haven't looked like the same, and it just seems like they haven't gotten their flow yet. And I hope it comes. They're still ranked inside the top 25. They're ranked 24, like I said. I don't think they should be ranked at all, period. I don't think they're a ranked team right now, the way they have been playing. And I think this really can turn south really quick. If they early thing, we'll get into it later. I think they'll beat Davidson, but they could potentially match up with Indiana and Gonzaga, who's a top three team in the country. And what do you really think could happen if Arizona say they only win one game in this upcoming tournament?
I think it'll depend on probably the first two games. I think if they lose within the first two games, I think we'll see a lot of pivoting and we're gonna see a lot of different things to where maybe they just push it fast break the entire time, or maybe we see a lot of minutes changes and a lot of different people taking more shots. So I would not be surprised to see a lot of non-characteristic Tommy Lloyd sets coming up
Yeah,
if that were to happen.
yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked in the near future if Carter Bryant replaces Townsend in the starting lineup. I think by the end of the year, Carter Bryant will be a starter on this team. And I because you see the impact he makes in 20 minutes. What would he do in 30 plus minutes? I really think he's one of the best athletes on the team. I think they benefit a lot by having him. But do you have any other final takeaways from this Duke loss?
You bring up Carter Bryant starting and putting Townsend. I think it would look weird, but I'm curious what it would look like maybe to put Caleb on the bench and just bring him in to score. Because obviously it seems like there's stretches where he'll be in the game and like he'll kind of just like be there and it feels like he's on the court to score and it's like whenever he's got the ball and he tries to score, he's forcing it. And so I'm curious maybe what that could look like, bringing him off the bench just to score as a second unit guy. I think that and that would look weird, but I don't think we're super far from away from being in a position like that, like you said.
Yeah, I don't think we're too far from that, but I just Caleb's such a hard-headed guy. I mean, maybe if it's for the better of the team, hopefully he would do whatever's best for the team, but I just can't see a guy like that in his final season. I mean, one of the highest NIL earners still in the country, no matter his own court success or not. I would be shocked by that one, but like I said, if Arizona struggles in this tournament, anything's possible. But Jordan, coming up after our break next, we will break down the Battle for Atlantis bracket, give our picks for who we think's going to win the entire tournament and how far Arizona will go. All right, Jordan, let's jump back into it and let's talk about the Battle for Atlantis tournament. This is always a great tournament during Feast Week every year. Arizona is in a premier tournament again during this week. They've been in a couple of them as well in the past, but the tomorrow on Wednesday, as we're recording this, the Battle for Atlantis tournament begins and it starts on the East Coast at noon. It's Louisville taking on Indiana. Indiana's ranked 14 right now, and Louisville is 3-1. They lost their first big matchup against Tennessee a couple weeks ago. The Indiana Hoosiers are 4-0 this season. Haven't played anyone so far, but they are a really good veteran team. I'll start it off. I think Indiana's gonna win this game. I think Umar Ballo, the former Arizona Wildcat, is gonna be the difference here. I really think that Indiana's veteran team is gonna prevail here. Who do you think takes this one home?
Yeah, I would agree. Louisville looks completely different with Pat Kelsey. It's his first year there. Kind of completely changed up that roster. They have a former Wisconsin Badger, and Chucky Hepburn, who they gave a pretty big penny to lure away from Wisconsin, but they've struggled quite a bit early in the season. So I expect just kind of Indiana and their depth to just kind of continue to dominate. And I'm excited to at least see them play like a really good team on a neutral site. But yeah, I've got Indiana as well.
Yeah, that would be Indiana's first Power Four victory of the season. Moving on, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. West Virginia, the Mountaineers face the Gonzaga Bulldogs here, and Gonzaga is 3-0 to start the year. They're 5-0 now. They beat Arizona State. They beat Baylor, two of their marquee matchups. This team is one of the most experienced teams in the country. They led by Graham Ike, and Mark Few really has put together one of his best teams in the last couple years. I think this one's going to be a rout. I got Gonzaga to win this one and move on to the semifinals. Who do you got in this game?
Yeah, I agree. Gonzaga's I got Gonzaga.
All right. Well, so far we both got Louisville, Gonzaga. Moving on and moving down the bracket, Oklahoma is taking on Providence. That game's taking place at 5 p.m. It's the third game of the night. Arizona is the fourth game. In the third game, Oklahoma taking on Providence. We talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but like I mentioned with Gonzaga, Oklahoma is very experienced as well. They have five players scoring double figures per night, and four of their five starters are in their fifth season at least in college basketball. They have a player in their sixth year, so really experienced team. I've been impressed by Oklahoma. They're undefeated. They haven't really played anyone yet, but I think that they're going to find some more success here.
Yeah, I would agree. Porter Moser, for viewers that aren't super familiar, he was the head coach during those crazy Loyola Final Four runs with Sister Jean. He was their head coach. I think this is his second or third year at Oklahoma, and so once you're in a place for a little bit, you're getting guys in there, and just the age and the experience that that team has, I think they could do very well in this tournament. So I'm taking Oklahoma as well.
Yeah, well, we're at the final game of the night in Atlantis. It's going to be Davidson taking on Arizona, 7:30. Arizona looks to snap their two-game losing streak. I'm looking forward to this one. Arizona hopefully is as motivated as ever to get the job done, to bounce back against Davidson, but Davidson is the former home of future NBA Hall of Famer Steph Curry. And this season, they have a pretty balanced attack. Four players scoring in double figures. They are about a little under average at from the 3 point land, 35%. And they're led by Reed Bailey. He's averaging 19 points a game, 8 rebounds, the third year big man. He's a really talented player. I think Arizona needs to be a little physical and aggressive on him, and I think they have the right pieces for that. I think this will be a little close, but I think Arizona is going to find success once again in one of these midseason tournaments in round one. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think some of the challenges that Reed Bailey, like you said, he's their leading scorer, their big man, kind of poses to Arizona. I think is going to make this game, I think, go down to the wire. I think Arizona will come out, but I think it'll be a one or two possession ball game in the last minute of the game.
Yeah, moving up to the top of the bracket, we both have it. Indiana taking on Gonzaga in the semifinal up top in there, and that's that part of the bracket. I think Gonzaga, I favor them in this game. They are the higher ranked team, but it's not just because of that. It's because of their experience. Like I said, they have the one of the best veteran head coaches in all of college basketball with Mark Few. They have so many guys that could beat you. They got two great ball handlers in Nemhard and Hickman, and then the big man with Graham Ike and Huff. They really have a balanced attack, and I just don't. I think Indiana is a good team, but I don't really think they have that number one guy that they can kind of rely on in a game like this. How do you see that one playing out?
Yeah, I think that's what these tournaments are for, is figuring out who your number one guys are. And people just keep doubting Mike Woodson. So, and I just really love the way this Indiana team is set. And again, Umar's in a new place. I'm happy to see him in a new role and kind of just get a little bit more attention from the other side of the country. So I got Indiana in this one.
Yeah, well, that game should for sure be great. And these games, the semifinal matches, will be taking place on Thursday. In the second semifinal, we both have it as Oklahoma taking on Arizona, and this should be a good matchup, a good test. But I just don't think Oklahoma's as talented as Arizona, and I do think that when you look at who Arizona lost to, they lost to Wisconsin, who's in the top 15. They lost to Duke, who before they lost to Kansas when we're recording this on Tuesday night, they were ranked inside the top 15. I think Oklahoma is a step back in competition, and it might be false hope. It might be just trying to close a blind eye and praying for the best with this Arizona team at this point. But I really hope that Arizona could get to this championship game in this tournament because I think it would go a long way for the confidence for this group.
Yeah, I've pretty big doubts, especially with what we've seen from this squad in the last week and a half. And I don't really think a game against Davidson is going to be a quick fix that gets this team kind of just to snap out of it and kind of figure out where they're at. I think they're going to struggle big time against Oklahoma. I think that snap I think would happen after the tournament is over into where they go home, they go back to Tucson, they're able to look at film, they're able to figure out what different lineups worked, what different guys having the ball majority of the time helped them most. So I think Oklahoma is going to win in that matchup, and just due to the experience, due to Porter Moser kind of being in these tournament settings before, um, and I just think it's a lot. It's a lot from, and I just take it from what we've seen over the last week and a half,
Yeah.
2 weeks with this Arizona team. I think it's a lot to overcome of fit, like within a day, within 2 days of like, okay, that worked. We're just going to do it again. And I just don't see that being a super successful plan for them. So I think they're going to lose to Oklahoma in that semifinal game.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of have a little, still holding on a little bit of false hope here, and I do think that their problems are way bigger than fixing in these games. I really, I still think we're awaiting, and we're gonna have an elite Caleb Love game, and he can propel a team forward even when it looks bleak. But so we both have. I want you to start off on your prediction here before we go. You have Indiana taking on Oklahoma in the championship game of the Battle for Atlantis tournament. Who do you got winning this one and for that potential matchup?
In our first episode, I thought Indiana would be Arizona, but from what we've seen from Arizona, I still think Indiana's going to win the whole thing. It'll just be a different final, but I've got Indiana winning the whole thing.
Yeah, so you have former Arizona Wildcat Umar Balo getting a taste of some midseason success once again in a different uniform. I have Arizona taking on Gonzaga, a little bit of a homecoming, not at home, but still a face
Yeah,
off
yeah,
between Mark Few and his protege Tommy Lloyd. That's also in the back of my mind, in back of everyone's mind. That's the must-watch TV that everybody wants to see. The storylines attached to it, and maybe we won't get it, but I really hope we do. I think that I think those are the two most talented teams in this tournament. But as we know, that the most talented teams don't always win out in this
yeah.
crazy
Hmm.
sport. In this
Yep.
game, I still, I kind of agree with you. I don't think Arizona has what it takes to at this point and hasn't proved that they can win the three straight games in 3 days. I don't think they have that in them right now. I value, like I said, Mark Few and the veterans they have on this roster. I think Gonzaga, although they're ranked third in the country, I feel like they're still maybe a little under the radar just because they don't have that. They don't have that
That
Cooper
star.
flag. Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't have that Cooper
Yep.
flag, that Hunter Dickinson, that clear cut number one guy. But I think they might have the most complete team in the country. And when you have a guy like Mark Few leading the ship, that's enough. So I got Gonzaga winning this one, and I really think that if Arizona can't get to the semifinals, at least in this, if they can't beat Davidson, I really think this is going to be a really big turning point of the season. What do you think of a potential matchup between Gonzaga and Arizona.
Yeah, I think it would be must-watch TV, especially a disciple being able to go against his former coach, and they're both at blue blood basketball programs that have a ton of class, a ton of history, and especially with Tommy Lloyd being a part of the history and a part of the culture. Because as much as you want to maybe skip around it, a lot of that probably doesn't happen without Tommy, with how
100%.
how big of a pivotal member he was of that program for so long, and the great recruits that he brought in, and the development that he helped achieve. So I think it would be must-watch TV. I would love to see it. Um, and I think the organizers of the tournament were probably hoping it was going to happen by just what Arizona was bringing back, what Gonzaga was bringing back, and putting them on the opposite side of the tournament. So if they met, it would be in the championship. So it's definitely not out of the realm of possibilities. It's college basketball; anything can happen. UConn lost to unranked teams back-to-back days and Jim Maui Invitational, so anything can
Yeah.
happen. But one thing I do want to remind our viewers is that in 2022. The Maui Jim Maui Invitational MVP was Umar Ballo. And I'm not saying that he's being used in the same way because he's definitely not. Indiana's a very different team than Arizona's been in the last 3 or 4 years, and they change like a little bit of their offense every year. But Umar Ballo has a record of balling in these mid-season tournaments. So I'm just saying, I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, he has had success with Arizona, especially that tournament. He was just unbelievable to say the least. And yeah, you said the organizers would love that. The networks, the television networks would love to see Arizona take on Gonzaga. That would be great
Hmm.
to see. I hope we do get that. But overall, the loss to Duke is in the rearview mirror at this point. It was a tough loss. But the way to get better is by growing and learning from your mistakes. And
Hmm.
this is the time where we're truly going to see how great of a coach Tommy Lloyd is. If he can get this team, get his players back on track in the future to revamp this season. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for watching, viewing, liking, and subscribing to today's episode of Bear Down Ballers. He's Jordan Pollock. I'm Ryan Wall.